This episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast is the continuation from last week with Robin MacPherson. On this episode, we go into more specifically how to learn languages.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. This is episode 10. And as always, you can find the show notes, links, any resources that we mentioned during the show. You can find that over at actualfluency.com/10. So the big 10, I'm excited for it. And today I don't want to talk too much before the interview segment, because this is a continuation of the discussion I had with Robin MacPherson from last week. So I'm sure you guys are eager to get the continuation of that interview, so I'm not going to talk too much. All I want to say is just thank you so much for your support, and if you wouldn't mind leaving a review on the iTunes page, or a rating, you can probably just rate it. If you go to actualfluency.com/iTunes, then I'm super excited about that. And a quick shout out to the show partner, Audible. If you want to get a free audiobook with no strings attached, you can go to actualfluency.com/free, and all the details are there. All you have to do is sign up for a free 30-day trial, and then you can get any audiobook you want for free. They have 150,000 titles, so there should be enough to choose from. And of course, you can get Benny Lewis's new book, Fluent in 3 Months, read by Benny himself. So that's actualfluency.com/free for more information on that. And without further ado, let me bring you the continuation of last week's interview with Robin MacPherson. If you had to learn a new language, new foreign language tomorrow you knew nothing about, I actually ask this question most weeks if I remember it, but I want to ask you, how would you do it? You know, what kind of materials or routines would you employ? You talked about phases before, and was that something you got out of studying all these internet polyglots and their methods?
Absolutely. It was something that I got from trial. I love my degree was very sort of research based and very analytical, because I did a sort of I'm not going to go into that, but so I love doing that, and so an analysis. I like looking at what people are doing, trying it out. And so anyway, so yeah, it was. I'll answer the question. There's two ways I could answer it. So the first one would be the way that I would add a new language tomorrow. A brand new one would be different than if I was a complete beginner to foreign languages. But the only way it differs is the beginning. So would it be okay if I just sort of summarize the way I would do it, I guess, in the beginning, and then I'll just
go for it.
Okay. So the way I do it, and the way I add languages, so Italian is a great example, because this is one I added, the most recent one I added. Is I have found throughout not just languages, but throughout quite a long period of my life, that I'm able to add new skills very little by little every day. And once again, it may sound obvious, but I find that most people seem, especially in the language learning community, a lot of people do seem to disagree with this maybe, but I find that it doesn't disrupt my focus. So if I'm focusing on French, like I have been, I was focusing on French, but I was also in school. I was writing 2 graduation theses. I was doing Japanese and Spanish, but I decided that I would commit, when I was walking to class and walking back every day, I would do an audio course for Italian.
Oh.
And I just said, and I committed to doing it every day. And that's something I'm good at. I think is that when I commit to something, I'm quite good at sticking to it. And so, because I know from experience what this would do. And so what happened was I ended up doing about 2 or 3, classes a day, instead of 1 on this audio course, which was Pimsleur. Once again, I'm not going to go into too much in this discussion about which things, unless you want me to, just because I think there's so many videos out there about that.
My philosophy is that the method doesn't matter at the end.
Exactly.
It's finding what works for you. And if Pimsleur works for you, you should definitely try it out. But if you don't and like you say, there are so many reviews and description about it. So don't worry about that one.
Okay, cool. Yeah, because there are some things I think that don't get discussed enough, and I've been really excited about talking to you about them. So I will try to highlight those. Instead.
Yeah, do that.
So it was Pimsleur, but so I went through pretty much the whole 3 levels of Pimsleur in a month and a half. Just by doing this, and it did not in any way disrupt my French studies. Now, and there are reasons for that. I was in what I'll explain in a minute. It's called the reading phase for French, which is where I found that the amount that I was getting back from my time reading French was 10 times more than what I was getting from listening, because my listening comprehension wasn't at a level where it was helpful, but it was much more helpful for me to do my Italian. So that's why I did that. And so I went through all 3 of these courses with having no effect to my my French or other languages. And the whole reason why I did that, and then I switched to Assamil. So now I'm doing Assamil still. All I'm doing is 15 minutes a day now. But what that does is that I'm gradually building up a sort of foundational knowledge in a new language with very little effort. And what that does is that then when I decide to then switch my focus language to Italian, for example, I will have such a huge head start as of whether I just sort of stuck to. And what I find is that had I just stuck to French and not done the Italian, I don't find that my French would have actually changed that much because of the way I structured it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
so I find I'm able to add a new language quite early on without really putting much effort in, but it makes a massive difference if you just do it every day. So that's the way that I would differ. Whereas, of course, if I was starting a brand new language and I was a brand new language learner, somehow having what I know now, then I would do things differently. So. But is that okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the country is that you wouldn't do the Italian Pimsleur course whilst you were doing the French Pimsleur course. That's kind of can I deduce that from what you're saying is?
Not necessarily. It's just that. Well, I guess I could. I wouldn't even really use Pimsleur if it was my focused language. But the main idea is just that I find you can add new languages if you do them structured and you do it little by little and so that then when you switch your focus to that new language, you have a massive head start.
Right.
That's the main premise there. But of course, if it's your first foreign language, then you're not going to have a primary language So basically what I do is I have my phase 1 is just I just call it the beginner phase, where all I need is a beginner textbook. Okay. Where I'm just getting exposure. Now there are other things that go on here. I like this analogy of, I find that people often talk about with language learning what activities to do. Read lots and lots and lots, listen lots and lots and lots, or whatever it is, speak lots and lots. But I don't think enough really gets told about like how to do it. And the reason why this is important is when I was researching sort of exercise and diet, the guy was talking about how if you do a push-up, which is the same activity, just like reading, just like listening or speaking, the way that you sort of think about it inside your body can completely change the workout. If you put pressure on the outside of your arms and sort of tense those muscles, you can get a very good workout on your sort of shoulder and upper back muscles. Whereas if you tense the abdomen, so what's going on inside is really making a big difference. And I think that a lot of people just they watch these guys on YouTube and, oh wow, I'll just do loads of listening, and it doesn't always work. And so I think it's important to sort of think about what you're actually doing. So I get a beginner course, I go through that. And while I'm going through this beginner course, this is very important for me, is I want to be finding music, films, and movies. Now, this is not for learning at this stage. This is for motivation, because this is the stage that I want to be getting interested. So I will watch movies with English subtitles for me, whatever native languages. No shame there, because I'm not watching it at this stage to really get a whole lot of language exposure. I'm getting cultural exposure. I'm trying to get myself excited. If I get into a show where I'm like, oh my God, this is great, that's excellent for the coming stages. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So yeah, and then I'm also shopping for a book. This is a really important thing. My favorite so far has been The Little Prince. Have you heard of that?
I have not.
It's originally in French by I believe a Belgian author, but I hope I'm not wrong. But in French is Le Petit Prince, and it's basically, for me, it is absolutely perfect for the reading. My phase 2 is called the reading phase for me. Now this book has been translated into loads of languages. I saw someone on a forum the other day who had it in Arabic and Japanese and Korean, So just one example of a great book. And the reason why, and what I do now in the reading phase, once I've gotten a little bit of exposure, I've gone through my beginner book. I just want to quickly mention, I tend to not finish the books, by the way. I find that with Assamil is a good example. that by the time I get to, they have like 110 lessons on average, and by the time I get to lesson 80, 90, I find I'm already there. I don't need to continue because I'll get more out of the phase 2.
Other sources.
I think some people are just, they're hell bent on finishing every book they start, which isn't not a bad quality, but I just think that a lot of times you'll know, and you probably know this, Chris, you just get that feeling like I'm ready to move on, So reading phase. So what I do, and this is really important, because the way I learned Japanese was full on. It was the brute force method that people talk about. I was Anki mania. It was ridiculous. I mean, and I know you're a fan of Memrise, and I'm not saying that in general this is bad, but Anki was like my source of learning for a long time. I mean, oh my God. I mean, that was what I spent sometimes 9 hours. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, and yeah, you know what? It works if you do it 9 hours a day and you just, and you do other things. But so what happened though, and this is so important, I think, is that I got to the stage where like I just couldn't watch a drama without pausing it every 5 seconds to look up every word I didn't know in the Japanese subtitles. Wow. If I read a book, and this is really important. And Anthony Lauder alluded to this sort of in his presentation, which in regards to sort of what makes polyglots different than polygnots, is you lose, I find, the ability, or it gets rusty to guess. Right. Because you become so used to either being able to look things up or just wanting to look every single word up. And it's very dangerous, actually. And it hindered me with my French learning for a little while. And it took me a little while to sort of get, now I'm fine, but it took me a little while to get out of that habit. Right. So this is what I'm saying, that because what I now do with the reading phase is I get a very low level native speaker intended book, and I just read it. Now I do it 2 times. Without any dictionary, anything, for the most part. Maybe if I'm super curious, I'll look it up. Now I know that you may not agree with this. I'm not sure, so feel free to yell at me. But the reason is that this, for me, and this is why it's important to get a book that's of a good level for you, not too hard, and is that it gets you sort of, is a good start on being able to guess, and getting used to the language and getting a lot of it gets it done quickly. Right. Because if you just read, and once again I realize this is a bit controversial, if you just read through, and as long as it's not too hard, if you just read through it and just make your goal, I just want to understand the general story the first time. What I found was, and this is obviously easier with related languages, I found that the second time I went through the book, I understood so much more, and I really felt like I had a pretty good grasp. And then the third time I did go through the book using a dictionary to look up stuff that I wanted, and I made a glossary, and I just, but the point is I didn't spend too much time on the nitty gritty. I just wanted to get exposure. I think that's a really good point that's often not overlooked. I know Anthony also talks about it, but the point is that if you have to pause your natural flow of reading to look up every word, or if you can use this concept in all language learning. You can say, if you go to Google Translate to make sure every single sentence you try to say to someone on the Skype, or even in a speaking practice, if you try to make it all right, or spend unnatural amount of time on each word, then you're impeding your own learning process. Exactly. I think that's so right. And then another thing, and there's a lot going on here, and I didn't necessarily know I was doing this when I first started, but one of the things that happens if you try this method, I'm not sure if you've tried it yourself or not, is that you will see so many words so many times. And guess what? There's going to be a lot of words that you can't figure out. But what this does is when you go through that third time, after going through it twice and still not being able to figure out some words, you will remember all of those words. I mean, you will, because you are going to you'll be dying to know by that point, what in the heck does this word mean? And you will remember that. And this is what's so crucial. Whereas, in the short term, if you just plug them all into your flashcard thing, which is useful, in my opinion, in ways, but not in this way for me, then you might learn more words in the short term, but you're going to be it's harder to keep them up. If you do this method, this is why it's important at this phase, is that you will find that after you finally go through that third time, not only will you be so happy because you've finished the book the third time. It's great to get momentum too. It's great to actually finish them. Right. And you will just, all those words that you've seen so many times, they will stick in your head. And it's a great way of getting that quote unquote high frequency vocabulary.
It's more natural too.
is, and here's the other thing that it does is that, and you know, I know this is discussed, but it's so important. My only qualm with the way that some people and the way that I used Anki is that, and or memorize, is when you use it as your sort of sole source of learning, because and as we most any seasonal language learner knows, I mean, words don't just translate. They don't. I mean, and a ton of words have so many meanings in so many different contexts and different, you know, and you just can't, even if you get a flashcard that someone else made. And you know, a good example, I like to give examples all the time, is like the in French, tenir, which you could translate so many ways. It's kind of like hold, take, whatever. But it could be, you could say tenir une conversation, which is like to hold a conversation. So it's like, in this case, it's like hold, but you could also say like tiens, which is like, okay, let's go. Like, all right. You could also say, if someone says, I bet you $10, you can't do that. You could say tenu, which is like taken. Oh, really? And there's all these different ways to use this verb, and like there's no way that you would, even if you had a flashcard that had all those different meanings, there's no way you'd understand how to use them. Right. And what happens is I can tell you exactly where I learned each one of those examples, and I had the same thing in Japanese, because when you learn from content and doing it this way, those examples stick in your head. Right. And so when I had homework in Japan, I literally would just write down. I either would remember it perfectly and I would just recite. We'd have a grammar point, right? And it would be like, use this grammar point. I could remember tons of sentences from dramas. And if I couldn't remember them exactly, I knew exactly which episode it was and whereabouts it was, because I'd spent so much time with these dramas, and, you know, so anyway, I just find that you get it's like an anchor, you know? And when I was using Anki as my main substance, I had spent too much time on a white screen with a few characters in the middle. And it's just like being in a big vacuum. There's nothing to anchor your knowledge to, you know.
But that's the power of memorize. So if I just give my weekly
go plug it. Yeah, give it a plug.
I really should start getting paid for this, but anyway,
I agree.
You know, the difference in memorize is when you get a word, you create a mem, which is basically a mnemonic, you know, a memory aid through a picture. And if you're doing it really properly, and I must admit, I don't do that a lot anymore because it's very time consuming. But if you take a word and you think of something that it reminds you of, for instance, I'm stealing this from Michel Thomas Russian, but to understand in Russian is ponimat. And the woman said, imagine a pony sitting on a mat. So if you have a picture in the memorize of a pony sitting on a mat, or, you know, you just maybe a pony plus mat or something where you can have a little bit of a silly image, that's kind of the what memorize tries to do. And that's exactly what you're talking about as well. And
exactly,
the benefit is that it's, you know, it's community, of course, like Anki is community driven. So if you choose a popular language like Japanese or French, a lot of people will have created these ingenious memes that you can use if you can't find one your own. If you're choosing a little bit of a more obscure language, of course, it's more difficult. And I must say, some Russian words are just impossible to connect to anything, so it's just brute forcing. But that's kind of the end of my memorize plug of the week. Okay. But you see how that works with the anchors.
I agree, and this is where I will differ a bit, though, or I will, if it's okay.
Sure, that's why.
Hopefully, memorize won't send Hitman over to me and take me out. But the reason why I think that my memorize or Anki for me would be, I would use differently, which I'll explain in a second, is that we was about context. A lot of people, I think, context is a lot of different levels of context you can have, and I think a lot of times it just gets grouped into one. People say, "Oh, context, example sentence, bam, I've got context." Where for me, example sentences are still pretty elementary for context for me, because if you then, let's say you take a drama. Okay, I love this as a good example. So not only when I learn something from a Japanese drama, and Japanese is if you learn Japanese and you're not using dramas, or, you know, then you're missing out because it's such a great resource. If I learn that, not only do I know the character's story, I know the character's personality, I've connected with him or her, I've got the story of the overall episode, which this sentence is appearing in. Then I've also got the overall context of the whole series of episodes. And it's such a much deeper and richer level of context for me, that the anchor that I get is, for me, is 10 times larger, and I remember these things so well when I do it that way. And also there's Japanese is a good example where there are some scenarios where, like, I don't want to get too technical with like specifics of languages, but it's like I learned a phrase in that. I'll just really briefly explain this so it's not too technical. But there's a word in Japanese which is omo, which means to think. Okay. And there's different ways you can say it. One of the ways is like to say you can say do omoimasu ka, which means what do you think, or you could say do omotte no. Okay, the only difference really is for the basics is that one's sort of formal, one's informal.
Right.
However, I learned this phrase do omotte no. What do you think about whatever from dramas? I learned it from several things, and this is where the idea of making mistakes being important comes in. Is that when I was in Japan, somebody would put cabbage in their food, and I'd be domotte no, cabbage domotte no, and they just look at me weird, like what? Like that sounds kind of. I mean, it makes sense, but it sounds kind of strange. And I made this mistake several times to where I had to ask, why is it weird? And so they thought about it long and hard. We realized that domotte no is specifically for when you're talking about your feelings towards somebody.
Wow.
Like, do you like this
Right.
person? Like, and I looked back and I realized that every scenario I'd seen in dramas was either two little girls or two high school girls talking like, "Hey, Takeshi-san, domotte no?" Like, what do you think about Takeshi? And I realized, and it was how
funny.
bizarre is that? And as far as what I was saying about cabbages and like ingredients of food, it's like I know you love food, but
Right.
But this is a great example of how like I get the combination of making mistakes, which is another important phase, and you having this drama, this huge anchor of like wide context. That is what helped me get to that. And I've heard so many. I've almost never heard another foreigner actually use that correctly.
Right.
I'm not saying I'm the only one, but it's just, and I think that those are the things that you cannot learn sometimes from just a flashcard. But
Right.
once again, that's not to say I don't use them.
Yeah, and I just want to put in as well that Russian is exactly the same, where in French and most European languages, each verb can mean a multitude of things. But in Russian, if you say idu, for instance, which is I go, it doesn't mean by train. You can't go by train. You need another verb for that. Поехать, I think it is.
Exactly.
It's so specific. Is it the same in Japanese in general?
Absolutely. Oh my God, Japanese is and just I'm not saying it's the most, but in my experience, this is an example. I mean, because there are about 8 ways to say what do you think about that,
right? And
like the fact that this one is like just specifically. I mean, there's so many tiny things. So yeah, exactly. And once again, this is where the dramas are great if you're not in the country, because I don't think you need to be in the country. I think that there are certain things, certain levels of native fluency and such that you might need to be there, but there are a lot that you can get from these dramas. Right. So I guess I should probably pull back to the method.
Yeah, how far are we? We're on phase 3 or 2.
Yeah, so phase 2 is what we finished. Yeah, so I read 2 times a beginner book, and then I get and then I'm also shopping for new books. Right. So once I go through this 3rd time, I will admit this is a bit time consuming. This might not be for everybody. I have alternatives for people that if I'm teaching people languages, I try to figure out what kind of learner they are. So I'm not just making them, do this if they're not going to like it. But then we get to this sort of autonomous stage. When I say autonomous, I'm talking more about where you're able to start learning from real texts without much help. Mm-hmm. So you can, if you have a basic dictionary and things like that, you can pretty much guess the meaning. You can figure out things like, oh, well, that's the dictionary says this, but it probably doesn't mean that. This is what I will use links. Steve Kaufman's going to love this because I know, I know that he gets some flack for that for promoting it all the time. But I use Link for this purpose. But I know there's other things out there. Anthony Lauder once mentioned that one you can make yourself for free, but it's just a bit more work.
It is, yeah.
But yeah, what I do is then I go nuts. Then now, like this is like sort of my phase 3 where I'm still. It's my mass reading stage. Then it's my mass. It's vocab acquisition stage for me. I find that I don't. If I was just doing French or Russian, for example, I know you're doing Russian right now, then I would also do lots of listening and stuff like that. But I think the bulk of my time at this stage for learning is actually reading, because I find that the biggest issue with listening to content is it's not always actually about not having a vocab. It's actually about you're not good enough at listening.
Right.
And so I just find that when the idea of comprehensible input, which gets thrown around a lot, you need to understand a very high percentage of what's going on to really get a lot out of listening. Now, I'm not in regards to acquisition. in my opinion. So this is why I don't think it's best. I do it some, and I challenge myself. And in French, I found the Little Einstein's kids show that I was watching, just to get myself a little bit of, and then I would also watch the movie. So it's important to challenge yourself. But for me at this stage, I do lots of reading, and I like having the podcast. That's why I like Link. The only thing is a lot of them have kind of bad audio quality, so I just sort of fish out the ones that have good ones. But it's not in Japanese. I didn't use Link. I found some excellent, audio podcasts. So it's really just about whatever is available for that language. But I do lots and lots of reading, and and this is the stage where I would use a bit more of Anki and a bit more Memrise, because now I've gotten that big base from doing the previous phase. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, but what I will put into Anki though, because I don't know if you agree here or not, I think we all have the experience where some words just stick. They just you see it once and it just sticks. I don't know. Do you have that experience?
Yeah, definitely.
But there are some words that just won't. Yeah. It's just like, why not?
That's true.
And so what I'll do, and this is why I do enjoy Link for this reason, but it could be, I even love paper dictionaries, and I know that's not common anymore, is that I'll just I'll go through, and if it's a very related language, like French for me, then it's going to happen a lot more that you just see a word and you're like, easy. Yeah. But yeah, I'll just go through. And so I don't bother putting the words into things like Anki or et cetera, if they're ones that just kind of stuck with me, or ones that I can kind of tell, because if you do lots of reading or listening, like Anthony Lauder mentioned in his thing, and you will see these words over and over again, which is the whole point. So I try to spend as little time as I can on those, because but what I do put into things like Anki are words that I can just tell. You just know when you see the word sometimes, like this word is going to be tough for me. And I also put collocations. I put groups of words. I put phrases. I put a lot more of phrases and things into things like Anki or if I was going to do Memrise. Because for me, those are almost more important for me because I'm gonna get the words, but I want to remember how to say, like, how should I say, etc. I want to learn. I want to remember these things. Collocations are so important. And I think that collocations, those kind of things, get kind of brushed over a little bit too much. Do you find that in your study? I mean, how do you tend to put a lot of those into your Memrise?
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, the way. Not really. No, I don't do much of it myself, because I found the Memrise course I'm doing right now has example sentences in every mem. So I find that I don't need to do much of that. But what I would, I'm a bit of a lazy learner, and I wrote a blog post about this recently. But what I would, if I could, I would color code words depending on gender in Russian.
That's a good idea.
Well, maybe not in Russian, maybe more in German, because in Russian it's kind of obvious, actually. Yeah. But maybe you could color code based on the case of a sentence or something. I mean, that would be some clever way of doing that. I haven't thought of it before, so that's why
It is, yeah. And actually, when I do ASML courses or any course, I highlight in several colors. Because that helps me just, any way you can add build your anchor. I'm just going to say that. Help. So whether it's a color, whether it's a picture, whatever, anything you can do to keep adding and adding and adding is great. And then to the next phase then is where I'm going to transition over to I'm going to keep doing a lot of reading, but I'm going to do lots and lots of listening then, because now after I've done a certain amount of reading and acquired lots of vocabulary, and of course I am still watching films, I am still listening to podcasts, and on Link, if it's Link or whatever, I can still listen a lot. I have two phases for my listening. The first stage is where I'm still challenging myself. I'm still watching shows, etc. But I'm gonna start to try to get things that do have the transcript. So with French, a great example is a comedy channel called Norman. Okay. And it's this funny guy. He's hilarious. He has like millions of views on all his videos, and it's so funny. But he speaks so quickly; it is incredible. And it's so much slang. It's so many cultural references, and so this is the kind of thing where I happened to have a friend who spoke French, and so I went through it with her. So what I would do is I'd go through and we would transcribe it together, and she would explain all the slang. Once again, of course, this is something you would have to have that luxury of having a native speaker or an advanced speaker. Right. But I'll go through that, and so what I'll do is she'll explain it all to me. I'll go through it. I'll put it into Link or whatever I want to do, and I'll learn the words. I'll read it a few times, and then I'll almost force myself to be able to understand the audio. Right. Because then I know that I know the words. Okay, so because I've gone through it. Anything I don't understand from that point on is all down to my listening ability.
Right.
So it helps me isolate my listening ability because I think it's hard to do that. And it took me a long time to figure out how could I do that. That's how I isolate my listening ability from my vocab. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so I find it's really good. And if you do, let's say, and I could understand about 2% of that episode the first time I did it. I found that actually I knew most of the words. Right. It was just because he was speaking so bloody quickly. Yeah. And, by doing 3, 4, 5, even 6 of those episodes, they're so funny anyway. And when you're done with it, you're so proud. I'll be honest with you. I've shown like 8 people that speak French those videos, and I'll watch them with them, just proud that I can understand it too. That's good. But it improves your listening ability exponentially. It's fantastic for me. And then after that point, it's kind of just sort of the next listening phase for me, and or just sort of mass input phase is then I'm watching movies, I'm watching films. I don't care if it's got English subtitles because there are some benefits for that. I don't care if it's got no subtitles. I do find actually one thing with Japanese I learned, which is an important point, is that I actually think it's a lot better for your listening ability to not have any subtitles. Because I find that I tend to be reading a lot, and especially with Japanese or a character-based language, or even maybe Russian for you because it isn't your sort of native alphabet. You tend to be focusing a lot more on the reading aspect. I find. Do you find the same thing?
Yeah, definitely. Because it's harder to do, so that's why you would need to put the effort.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I will watch with subtitles, but if I'm doing that, then I'm consciously improving my reading ability as well. Anyway, so and that's the sort of the very basic rundown of my thing. And then in between there, I also should mention that, like, for example, during there, and it's different for every people. I think it's important to speak to yourself. Right. I think it's great, and I think the problem is that people try it and it's awkward, right? It's almost like talking to a new person. Which is quite a funny thing. Yeah. But you get better at it. It really is almost like getting to know yourself, because you find you get much more comfortable over time. Yeah, you can start by doing simple exercises, talking about what's going on around you, describing it, and we know that's very limited. But you will find that, and this is how I get to there's a big question that comes up a lot. How do you start thinking in a foreign language? And I know that equation's sort of the way it's phrased is kind of not very good, because it makes it seem like, and a few different guys have said, well, you shouldn't be thinking at all. Right. But I know what the question's meant to ask, I think. And for me, talking to yourself is what does that for me, because I find that's when I find that after I'm studying French, I realize that my inside voice, you have that sort of inside voice, it's in French, and I'll suddenly come across a word that I don't know, and that's when I realize, oh, I'm actually thinking in French, So that's how I do that.
Yeah, that's a good do.
Sorry, I just went on. I think I probably went on a bit too long.
Well, that's fine. I'm sure people appreciate you sharing the lengths of your method as well as the individual techniques. So that's great. And I guess the final question. I mean, we have gone a little bit long, but the final question is what does the future hold? And any idea about when you will have episode 2 in your series ready?
Yeah, I have a lot of stuff coming out. It's just that this last few weeks I've been, like I said, I missed a month of school this semester because of Japan, and so I've been pretty backlogged, but I've got so many ideas coming out. And so what you can kind of expect from my channel is episode 2 sometime in the next few weeks. But not only that, I've got some really exciting stuff. For me, it's exciting. I got a comedy series coming out. Which is I'm hoping will be filmed. I'm going to try to do all of this to the best quality I can. And all of this is supposed to be language learner content. So it's all stuff that's supposed to be for language learners, either just as to enjoyment, entertainment, study material. And other than that, I have a much more artistic sort of abstract line of videos coming out, which are sort of stories about the different languages that I speak and such, which are just quick 4 to 5 minute shorts where it's much more artistic. It's not really a show format. And then lastly, I'm actually not sure if I want to give this one away or not, but I have a couple of exciting projects. So you can expect a lot of content hopefully on my channel. It's just a matter of time. Well, I think.
Amazing. And where can people find you? I mean, obviously all the links that we talked about in the episode are going to be on actualfluency.com/09, which is the show notes. And but where can people find you if they want to get in touch or know more about you?
My YouTube page for my YouTube channel is youtube.com/thelifeofrob altogether, and my website is thelifeofrob.com. And so
Easy as that.
Yep. And so, yeah, I was lucky enough to have the domain. Part of it was that I just didn't want to have, Rob682175, for my username.
No.
and then I actually quite liked it. But yeah, and my website is sort of still getting going, but I'll make sure that I have on the homepage my email address and etc. So if people do want to contact me for any reason, or yell at me or complain, then they can do that.
Yeah. Amazing.
Badly.
Well, thank you so much, Robin. It's been a wonderful pleasure talking to you, and I mean, just the time that's flown by, and what seems like no time is a complete perfect picture of just the quality of the discussion, I feel like. So I want to thank you so much for staying a little bit longer than we had originally intended.
You too, Chris. And just the simple fact that we're able to connect, you being in Denmark and me being here in the States, I mean, it's just incredible. So I'm really, really excited to be on your show, and I thank you for the opportunity.
No problem.
To talk on and on and on.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I'm sure I'll see you again sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. Talk to you soon, Chris.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.